We begin in the late 1500s. In different parts of East Asia, Portuguese and Dutch ships are laden with local goods, primarily spices, which are very expensive in their home countries. This trade is so profitable that it has already made Portugal one of the richest nations in Europe, while the Netherlands even attempt to purchase foreign ships in order to venture into the Spice Islands. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, England is lagging far behind its rivals, being an isolated and agrarian country. Then, in 1599, a group of wealthy merchants, privateers and explorers gathered to petition the crown for the creation of a national trading company to catch up with foreign powers. Amidst the Anglo-Spanish War, Queen Elizabeth is reluctant to authorize the company, hoping for peace with Spain. But when negotiations fail, she relents, and on the last day of 1600 issues a royal charter establishing the Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies. It is a joint stock company, meaning that anyone with capital can subscribe for shares and take part in the enterprise without having to sail to distant lands themselves. The charter also grants it a monopoly over English trade in the region. In February 1601, the company embarks on its first voyage. 4 vessels under the command of James Lancaster depart from England for the East Indies. After rounding the Cape of Good Hope by September, they reach Akin, where they trade with the local sultan, as well as plunder a Portuguese ship in the Malacca Strait. On June 6, 1603, they return home, carrying as much as 900 tons of pepper, cinnamon and cloves. In the following years, the company undertakes more voyages, but the better-armed Dutch, who have already established themselves in the islands, prevent the English from gaining a foothold and gradually push them out of the region. England then turns its attention to a less competitive region, India. Here lies the powerful Mughal Empire, rich in cotton, textiles, indigo and chintzes. In 1608, Captain William Hawkins arrives on the shores of Surat in West India. From there, he travels on to Agra, the capital of the empire, hoping to gain the Mughal emperor's permission to set up an English trading post. However, the emperor shows little interest, and Hawkins returns to England with nothing achieved. The Mughal Empire is so large, wealthy and powerful that the idea of using force is out of the question. In the following years, the English tried to set up a factory in Surat with only limited success, but they established one in Masulipatam, a port of Golconda, rivals of the Mughal Empire. Finally, in 1615, Thomas Roe, a royal envoy, makes a visit to the Mughal court in Ajmer. After 3 years of careful diplomacy and building trust with Emperor Jahangir, he eventually obtains permission to build a factory in Surat, but without major trading privileges. Soon after, the company opens another factory in Patna, trading first in silk and cotton and later in saltpeter. In 1639, Francis Day makes a deal to found a factory on the Coromandel coast, in territory belonging to the Vijayanagara Empire, which by then is already in decline. Soon after, he obtains permission to turn the factory into a fortified post. That's how England gets its first fort in India, named Fort St. George. Around the fort, a settlement grows that becomes known as Madras. Over time, it develops into an English colonial town, with its own administration, municipal status, and a population of about 40,000. In 1661, King Charles II marries the Portuguese Infanta Catherine of Braganza. As a dowry, he gets the port of Tangier in North Africa and a certain small group of islands called Mumbai. The latter is so little known that many are not aware of its location and mistake it for a Portuguese colony somewhere near Brazil. Yet in fact, it is a small archipelago near India's west coast. Remarkably, its natural harbor turns out to be so well suited for shipping that it quickly becomes the company's major naval base in Asia. In 1688, the Glorious Revolution takes place in England. King James II is deposed, William III and Mary II take the throne, and Parliament becomes the real center of power. To fund wars against France, the new regime creates a national debt, the Bank of England, and government bonds. The East India Company ties itself to this system. It lends money to the state and in return receives protection, privileges, and political influence. Directors also use bribes and lobbying to preserve their monopoly. With state backing, the company gains stability and becomes one of the pillars of England's overseas empire. By the end of the century, what began as a struggling trading concern has grown into a regional power. Confident in its might, the company no longer wants to be subject to the will of the Mughals. Instead, it turns to force, overtly challenging the empire. Little do they know that the Mughal Empire is at the peak of its might, being the richest and one of the most powerful kingdoms on earth at the time. As a result of the clashes that follow, most English factories in India are plundered or destroyed by the Mughals, and those that remain have to sue for peace, acknowledging Mughal authority. In 1690, Job Charnock obtains permission from the Mughal emperor to restore a factory in Bengal. On the site of the three villages of Sutanuti, Calcutta, and Gobindpur, he founds Calcutta. The area has harsh natural conditions, yet as the wealthiest region of the Mughal Empire, it quickly becomes Europe's most important source of goods in Asia. Over the following years, the company strengthens its foothold in Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay, gradually turning them into fortified colonial towns. In 1707, a fateful event takes place. While England and Scotland unite into Great Britain in Europe, the mighty and ruthless Emperor Aurangzeb, conqueror of vast territories and consolidator of the Mughal Empire, dies in India. After his death, many conquered territories rise in resistance, launching raids against Mughal authority and striking at the empire's heartlands. The turmoil weakens the empire to such an extent that many provincial governors, or nawabs, act as independent rulers and even stop paying tribute to Delhi. At this time, the French, who have arrived in India decades later than the English, become the first to start recruiting and training Indian soldiers, sepoys, realizing that trade alone cannot secure a lasting foothold on the subcontinent. In 1745, during the War of the Austrian Succession, the Royal Navy attacks French positions in India. The French strike back by seizing Madras. The Nawab of the Carnatic is outraged that the French launched their attack without his permission, and then refused to hand over the captured city to him. He marches his army against them, but the French, though outnumbered, crush his forces. At this point, the Europeans realize for the first time just how superior their tactics and artillery, refined through decades of Anglo-French wars in Europe, are to the Mughal-style armies. Rivalry between the French and the British escalates. The French throw their troops into local succession disputes, gaining territory and influence. By 1749, the British copy the same methods, backing their own candidates in Indian courts. Weakened Nawabs trade land and power for European officers and sepoy troops, and both companies realize that lending out armies is more profitable than trade. The Carnatic Wars turned the trading firms into military and political powers in India. In 1755, the company directors in London receive intelligence suggesting that the French planned to send their ships against British positions in India. Acting on this, the company dispatches Robert Clive, a young officer already known for the Carnatic Wars, to Fort St. David near Madras. At the same time, it orders the governor of Fort William in Calcutta, Roger Drake, to strengthen the city's fortifications, even though the local Nawab has explicitly forbidden it. The old Nawab sees the British fortifications as an act of defiance, but prudently refrains from immediate action. Yet shortly afterwards he dies, and his successor, Siraj ad-Dawla, takes a harsher line. He marches on the company's factory at Qasim Bazar and seizes it. He then sends an envoy to Calcutta with an ultimatum demanding the dismantling of the new defenses. Inside Fort William, Governor Drake underestimates the threat and does not expect an attack. But Siraj lays siege to the city, and within days his troops storm Calcutta, plundering it thoroughly. He renames the city to Alinagar. Robert Clive first arrives at Madras and then sails to Bengal, where he swiftly restores control over Calcutta. But the company's losses are so severe that merely restoring the old order is not enough. It must demand compensation from the Mughals and secure guarantees for the future safety of Calcutta. On January 3, 1757, Robert Clive declares war on Siraj ud-Dawla. It is the first time in history that a commercial company proclaims war on its own behalf. Just as more than a century earlier the English had underestimated the Mughals, so now the Bengalis fail to see what Britain has become as a military power. Siraj returns to Calcutta with an army of 60,000 men. But at night, Clive launches a surprise raid directly into his camp. Although the raid achieves little, it has the desired effect. In the morning, Siraj withdraws his forces and sues for peace. The company regains its privileges, restores full control of its operations in the city, and receives the right to mint coins and build defensive fortifications. Meanwhile, the 7 Years' War breaks out, and Admiral Charles Watson, the naval commander stationed at Fort William and working alongside Robert Clive, receives orders to strike at the French wherever possible. He targets Chandernagore, the largest French settlement on the eastern coast, centered on Fort d'Orléans. After a short battle, the British fleet and Clive's troops capture the town and its port. With this, the French are largely eliminated from Bengal. The company secures uncontested control of the region. Meanwhile, opposition to Siraj mounts. Financiers, bankers, and military officers turn against him and form a conspiracy. Lacking strength on their own, the plotters reach out to the company. Clive agrees to cooperate with them and secretly signs a pact with their leader, General Mir Jafar. At this point, the company's Calcutta Council operates entirely on its own, disregarding instructions from London. Clive then accuses Siraj of violating the Treaty of Alinagar and issues an ultimatum. Without waiting for a reply, he marches out to Plassey, where he faces Siraj's army of 50,000 men. Despite being heavily outnumbered, his troops employ a clever tactic that forces the enemy to flee. He then enters Murshidabad, the capital, only to find that Siraj has already fled. Not long afterwards, he is captured and put to death. The company claims immense rewards. At this point, it has already transformed into the main military and political power in Bengal. The authority of the Nawabs is permanently broken, and chaos begins to spread across the region. An uncontrolled stream of British traders pours into the region, refusing to pay taxes and seizing land. Around 400 new factories appear, while the chaos is only deepened by Mir Jafar's incompetence as a ruler. As his own and the company's troops' discontent grows over unpaid wages, the British conspire with his son-in-law, Mir Qasim. Under the pretext of protecting Jafar, they escort him out of the capital, while at the same time in Murshidabad, Mir Qasim proclaims himself the new Nawab. Thus, another coup is carried out with company's support. At this time, the Mughal court in Delhi is weak. The Emperor Alamgir II is a mere figurehead, while real power lies in the hands of his regent, Imad-ul-Mulk. Fearing to lose control once the emperor's son, Prince Ali Gauhar, comes of age, the regent tries to eliminate him. The prince narrowly escapes Delhi and flees east, without an army or money. While in exile, he learns that his father has been murdered on the regent's orders. This makes him the rightful successor, and he takes the name Shah Alam II. Arriving in Bengal, he is looking for support. Here the interests of all sides intersect. Shah Alam needs recognition and resources. Mir Qasim wants greater independence from the company and cover from the authority of a legitimate emperor. The company itself wants legal justification for its growing power in Bengal. So a deal is struck. Qasim recognizes Shah Alam as emperor. Shah Alam recognizes Qasim as his subordinate. And the company backs both with money. Everyone gets what they want: legitimacy, protection, and power. Yet only for a short while. Mir Qasim does not want to remain a British puppet. He shifts his capital to Mangir, away from company influence in Murshidabad, and starts building an independent base of power. There he trains a new army of sepoys in the European style, sets up an arsenal, and prepares to rule on his own terms. He also abolishes custom duties to make Indian merchants more competitive against the British, who trade duty-free under their privileges. The company sees this as a threat to its interests. In 1763, at Patna, its chief factor Ellis seizes the Mughal fort and plunders the city. Qasim sends troops from Mangir, defeats the British, captures Ellis, and takes hundreds of prisoners. Soon after, he orders the arrest of all Englishmen in Bengal. The company gathers its troops and goes on the offensive. After a string of victories, they reach Mir Qasim's main fortress on the Ganges. It is considered impregnable, but the British manage to storm it. Qasim finds his army effectively destroyed. With no forces left, he joins the Nawab of Awadh, Shuja-ud-Dawla, and Emperor Shah Alam II, who is now based in Faizabad under Shuja's protection, far from his nominal capital in Delhi. Together, they raise a massive army, hoping to drive the company out of Bengal. On 23 October 1764, the armies meet at Buxar on the Ganges. Mir Qasim, Shuja-ud-Dawla, and Shah Alam II lead about 150,000 men. The company under Major Hector Munro has only 20,000. At first, Shuja's cavalry breaks into the British camp, but lingers over looting, losing control and dropping out of the battle. Munro holds the line with his sepoys, then counterattacks. The Mughal forces collapse and flee, leaving behind their artillery and thousands of dead. After the defeat, Mir Qasim flees and disappears from politics. Shuja retreats to Awadh, but is forced to surrender the next year. Shah Alam II turns to the company to secure his throne. In August 1765, at Allahabad, he signs a treaty. The company receives the Diwani, the right to collect taxes in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Thus, the Mughal emperor is reduced to a symbolic sovereign, while the East India Company turns into a full-fledged state and the true ruler of Bengal, the richest region of India. That's how in just over 150 years the East India Company rose from humble merchants to masters of Eastern India. It would only take 80 more years for it to conquer the rest of the subcontinent. Yet with great power, greater burdens would follow, and each new step towards absolute dominance would also bring it closer to its eventual demise. We will turn to these events in the second episode.